All right, mathematicians, mathletes, math ninjas, Mr. Antonucci here, back at you with another video on completing the square. In the previous video, I showed you the process for completing the square with this example, and I told you I wanted to show you an example where the leading coefficient was not 1. In other words, the number in front of the x squared term is not 1. Pretty much the same exact process for completing the square, except there's one additional step. We're going to force this to have a leading coefficient of 1 by dividing everything by whatever the leading coefficient is. In this case, it's -3. So we're going to divide both sides of this equation by -3. All right, and that is the trick to completing the square when your leading coefficient is not 1. So -3x squared divided by -3 is going to give you x squared. 2x divided by the -3 is going to give you -2 thirds x, and 4 divided by -3 is going to give you -4 thirds, and 0 divided by -3, of course, is going to give you 0. Okay, so at this step, all we do is complete the square like we did before. So the first step is take half of the middle term and square it. Now, when you take half, be careful here. Don't get intimidated by the fact that there is a fraction there. You just multiply it by a half and square it. So in this case, the -2 thirds times the 1/2, the 2's are going to cancel, and you get -1/2 squared. Excuse me, -1/3. And then you get 1/9. Okay, so first thing is we divided everything by the leading coefficient if it was not 1. If it is 1, you can skip that step. Second thing is you want to also isolate the linear and quadratic terms. So we haven't done that yet, so we're going to need to do that right now. In other words, I want to add this -4 thirds to both sides to get the x squared minus 2 thirds x by itself. And then you take half of the linear term's coefficient and square it. So -2 thirds, half of that, square it. That's simplified to -1/3, square it, you get +1/9. Be careful with the signs there, okay? And then we're going to take that and add it to both sides. And what this does is it forces the trinomial on the left to be a perfect square trinomial. Now, do some sidebar work here. 4 thirds plus the 1/9. 4 thirds, if you multiply by 3/3, gives you 12/9 plus the 1/9 equals 13/9. Don't be afraid of fractions. Don't convert them to decimals, please. You will confuse yourself even more, particularly if you have a non-ending, non-repeating, or repeating decimal. It gets confusing. So you have 1/9 there, and then this side is going to be 13/9. This is a perfect square trinomial now, because we did this process over here. That will always, if you do it correctly, always factor into x and plus or minus whatever you squared over here. Okay, so in this case it's minus, so it's -1/3 equals 13/9. Now, to finish solving the equation, all we have to do is take the square root of both sides. Boop-a-de-boop, boop-a-de-boop. Sometimes square roots make noise. Now, whenever you take the square root and you're solving an equation, you got to remember that the square root could have been positive or negative. Let me just show you real quick over here. If I have x squared equals 4, and I take the square root, you normally would think x equals 2. But x can also equal -2, because when you square -2, you would get +4 there as well. Okay, and that's why we have to account for the fact that the square root could have been the positive or the negative square root. So left side simplifies to x minus 1/3. The right side, you would have plus or minus square root 13. And remember, we talked about how when you square root a fraction, you can take the square root of the numerator and denominator separately. And since 9 is a perfect square, you can just have 3. Now, you don't need a plus or minus on the square root 13 and the 3. The plus or minus holds for the whole fraction. Okay, now just get x by itself by adding 1/3 to both sides. And you would have 1/3 plus or minus square root 13 over 3. Sometimes you might see this written. Let me clean up that 3. Sometimes you might see this written. See, it's a common denominator. You might see it written as 1 plus or minus square root 13. Okay, and that's okay. That's okay. And just keep in mind that plus or minus implies two different answers, one where you do the plus and one where you do the other one. So x, if I just write my answers out, equals 1 plus square root 13 over 3, or x equals 1 minus square root 13 over 3. These are what we would call the exact answers. And you can always convert those to decimals by carefully, did I say carefully? Yes, I said carefully entering them into your calculator. So let me do that real quick. So 1/3 plus the square root of 13 divided by 3. And so the plus would be approximately, I'm gonna put a little wavy equal sign, 1.535. And then the other one where we subtract is gonna be approximately negative 0.869. All right, so those are our two solutions there. Okay, remember, if your assignment, your teacher, whatever you're doing asks you for the exact answer, you need to report it in terms of the square root. You can report it as one single statement with a plus or minus in it, like I did here or here. If they want the answer in terms of a decimal, you can just enter that bad boy into the calculator. Just do it carefully with parentheses and adding and subtracting and all that. And then report it to the desired number of decimal places. Here I went to the thousandth place and then rounded. All right, so hope that helped you in completing the square. If you have a question or a math problem you'd like me to make a video on, let me know in the comments and maybe I'll make a video about it. And as always, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell for notifications when new videos are uploaded. All right, guys, hope that helped.